Welcome. Thank you for checking out this video. My name is Jason Vidaurri and I'm the host at StoryHinge. And we have been running StoryHinge for over a year now. And I'll give you a quick summary. StoryHinge started out being about finding people with diverse stories, diverse personal stories, and hearing about that and how they find meaning and value in their lives. And we've done that, and we're still doing that. But we're refining things a bit here in Season 2. Season 2, we are looking more at story itself. What is a story? How do you tell a good story? What makes a good story? And interviewing story makers, story creators in their different forms, whether they're writing books, telling live oral stories, film, or I think there's some interesting work in the gaming industry in terms of storytelling. And I love playing with that idea too. Where does storytelling go into the future? And so that's what we're about now in Season 2, is diving deeper into that. And I want to give you that quick summary first, for those of you that are curious. And now, I guess I'll explain a little bit of the backstory. Why am I doing this? And I think stories have always been important in my life. Not uncommon to a lot of us, I think. And I remember in my youth when I was 8, 9, 10 years old and hearing stories from my grandparents. Particularly, I remember my one grandpa, he would share, it seemed like he'd sit at the table and share stories for hour upon hour. And I don't know if that was really the case, but it felt like that as a kid. But I still remember enjoying that moment, that connection. I can't recall many of the story specifics, but I remember him sitting there and going on for hours. And one line I do remember from him, though, is that he would say this. He'd come up with this date. He'd be like, I believe it was November 65. And even as a kid, I was like, wow, Grandpa, you remember that well? And to this day, I don't know if he really remembered that or if that was just he just put it together that way. But it fascinated me as a kid. And I think I probably would have got more into story creation had I had the opportunities. And so let's fast forward a bit. And this happened about 4 years ago. And I was taking my 2 older sons up to camp. And they were going to scout camp with a couple other of their friends. So these kids are about 12, 10-year-old kids. And we loaded up the van and got some extra snacks and stuff for the long drive. It was going to be a several-hour drive to get up to where we were going. And the kids started chatting and talking about life as they would. And I'm just sitting there driving, just listening and letting them have their time. And it was very entertaining, to say the least. They would talk about the life they saw around them, right? And then they put together some of these reasons on, like why they're homeless. And it was pretty funny. But a lot of times they kind of come to some conclusion about life on some of their reasoning. And, I'm at this time probably about 39 years old. And I'm like, yeah, that's not really right. That's not really true. And this kind of pattern kept going on, the different things they talk about. And as we got to the campground and got out and I'm unpacking the tent and setting things up, I'm kind of thinking about this event and kind of laughing a little bit, saying, well, yeah, they're so funny as a young kid. And I go, I was probably like that too back then. And then this happened. This occurred to me. I was like, wait a minute. I still do that. I still in that state. In terms of this, we have certain experiences and facts and knowledge, but there's gaps in it. And this is what the boys were doing. They had, as a 12-year-old, you have some knowledge and some understanding about the world, but there's gaps. And so you make connections, you make conclusions, you put it together as best you can. And in that, you're going to get a lot of errors. And I said, as a 39, I still do that. I still have done that throughout my life. And hopefully I have a little more knowledge, a little more experience, and maybe there's less gap there. But still, there's a lot of things I haven't challenged or changed, or stories I have not questioned. And that rolled into some other experiences shortly thereafter. And I went through another pretty formative, disruptive transformation in my life. And I had joined the Mormon Church, LDS Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, back when I was 19. Just right out of college. Out of high school, my first year in college. And that was a huge part of my life, and I very much was foundational. It was answer a lot of the questions I had. And I really found a lot of value and happiness through that, living that faith. But about 3 years ago, that started changing, and I started questioning different things that had been there. Some had been there for a while, but I started looking more into different aspects of that faith, and I guess in myself as well, and things just started to crumble, to fall apart, to not fit anymore, and that was really, really challenging, because it was so foundational to everything that I had and that I am. And I guess I'll share this quick story on some way to frame what I mean by when I say foundational. What does that mean? What are you talking about, Jason? And this happened actually a few years later, but it gave me some insight on why that's so disruptive of a change to go through, religious change like that. And I know we all experienced different challenges and changes in our life, and lots of them get to that level of disruption. And it was this little story that I had happen. I was in a new job doing a safety training. I was paying attention to the safety stuff, but in my mind I'm thinking about this question of how to understand something. How can I understand something? Just an object, first of all. How can I really understand it? What questions could I ask to fully understand something? And on my table right there, I had my glasses case. And so I got my glasses case, and I said, you know what? What questions could I ask about this glasses case to really, really understand it? And so I started writing down questions. And it was you can only ask so many questions, but who, what, why, when, how, where questions. But I think I came about 30 or 40 questions. I wrote them all down. And at the end, I looked at them all and said, okay, what is this? What can I break this down and understand what categories these questions fit into? And for me, I came up with 4. I came up with, first was identity, the identification of this thing, the name of it. That was number 1. Number 2 was purpose. What is the function of this thing? What's the purpose? Why is it here? Number 3 was its relation. Its relation to the table, relationship to me, its relation to other things. And number 4 was the code, or the laws that govern this thing. And to me, as I thought about it, those are foundational. That is, if I could explain all those things, that seemed to explain the foundation of this thing. Then I also flipped it and applied it to myself and said, does that work for when I question my own self? And it did. And I guess one thing that shifted a little bit was that relation turned into also relationships. Not only my relation to the world, but relation to other people. And, when I thought about at this time I had transitioned out of Mormonism by the time I had this experience. And I thought about that in relation to Mormonism and that difficult transition. And I thought, well, that's why it's so difficult, because it's impacting all those things. Identity was impacted, my purpose in life very much impacted, relationships with other people, my relationship to the world, how I saw myself fit in the world, and the code I live by. All those things were disrupted in a pretty strong way. And so that was a little bit of an insight later on. And because of that, in trying to find new foundations in my life, I started listening to people's stories and talking to more people and hearing more about their life and how they live. And in 2016, I came to this idea. I go, well, why don't I just do more of that? Why don't I keep doing that on my own, and instead of just looking on the internet and hearing other people's stories out there, why don't I go interview people myself and talk to them? I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so that's where the idea of the podcast came. And I said, well, if I'm going to be doing that, it'll be cool to invite other people to come along with me and hear these stories. And that's where it started. And it's been a ride. It's been really interesting and fun. I guess I'll hit a couple of the takeaways from my first season and talking to over 50 guests on hearing their stories and where season 2 is going. A little more details now. So some of the big takeaways is, I guess the first one is that I'm just blown away on our personal story, the value of our own personal story, and that every single one of my guests, even though very diverse in their experiences and different in the way they live their life, from some being, more a Christian faith type people to people that having no belief at all. And a couple things on that. First, I was like, wow, there's so many good ways to live life. To live good life even. And I was touched by that. The second part was like, wow, there's so much value in our own story. And it's just, to me at least, it started feeling like there's an untapped potential there. That we can utilize our own story better in our lives to live a more happy, more fruitful life where we're at today. And I'll tell you a story on that one. And this is something I had with me for a long time. So when I was about 15 years old, I grew up fishing with my grandparents, my grandpa in particular. And we went on a fishing trip, just him and I together, as we did quite a bit during this time. And we were in Colorado, we went out to Wyoming, so it's kind of a big trip for us when we go to Wyoming. It's a little extra drive, and there's also potential for some big fish out there in Wyoming where we go fishing. And often with my grandpa, we'd fish side by side on the river or creek. We weren't lake fishermen, we were river fishermen, and we'd watch each other during that. So if someone hooked onto a big fish and needed help landing that fish, we'd be there for each other. And that's how it would proceed, and we really fished all day long. We'd get up and have breakfast. I guess I'll say this, the only thing that we broke fishing time for was for meals and sleeping. So you get up in the morning, fish, get some breakfast, go fish again all the way, get some lunch, fish again all the way till evening, get dinner, go to bed and get up in the morning, do it again. And we do that for, 3-4 days, however long we decided to go fishing. And great times for me, just some great memories and all that overall. And on this particular day, we were like that. My grandpa was downstream a little bit, I was upstream, and I came and I hooked onto this fish. And I could feel it. I'm like, ooh, this is a good fish. A little fishing. And I'm like, okay. And I worked him, and I motioned Grandpa downstream, and he knew I had something, so he started making his way up towards me. And I'm working this fish, and for a while he takes off and goes into the fast water, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to hold him. I don't know if he's going to break my line. It's at that point where my pole is just hanging down and hanging on to him. And I go, okay, I worked him. And he actually came pretty close to me, not very much, probably 5-6 feet in front of me. There's a drop off in the water and some bushes and brush in there. And he seemed to go down deep in there and just stay there. And my pole is just bent. I'm just holding him like, and he stopped moving. I'm like, just holding there. And by that time, my grandpa's up next to me. And I'm like, kind of pulling and moving my pole a little bit, trying to see, but nothing seemed to move. And I'm going to tell Grandpa, I go, Grandpa, I think I lost him. I think I'm just snagged now because there's nothing here. My grandpa looks at me and said, no, you're fine. Just hold that tension right there. You just hold him and he'll come. And so I did, and I'm holding that pole, and it felt like a long time, but probably in 15-20 seconds, I start feeling movement again. And he starts moving, and I was able to pull him up and get him on the surface right there. My grandpa was right there with the net and was able to land him. And I've always had that story, and I've always enjoyed that, and it actually turned out to be the biggest fish I've ever caught. He's about a 24-inch rainbow. Or maybe it was 28 inches, because it's a fishing story, right? Maybe he was 30 inches. I can't remember. He's probably 32 inches. But something happened in season 1. As I'm hearing people's stories, I'm looking more at my own story. And so I looked back at this one. I said, well, there seems to be more in there. Is there more in that story that I can learn from? And a couple things came up in my mind. I'm like, you know what? There's more in that story. It's always been an enjoyable fishing story, but think about, there's some life lessons in that story itself. And one of the cool things was, would I have caught that fish without my grandpa there? Probably not. And his wisdom and his mentoring became prevalent in that story. I'm like, yeah, that's an important thing. This getting a mentor, this having someone else that has more experience and wisdom than you and help you along your journey is important. Having a mentor there. And another one was that sometimes in life we're in that struggle, we're in that conflict, and we're trying to work through it. And I think a lot of it's holding that right tension. I'm holding that fish with that right tension. Not too much. If I'd have pulled harder, I'd have broken the line or lost him. If I'd have let up and let it go slack, he could have wiggled and got away that way. So there was that right amount of tension to hold on to it. And I think life is that way too. There's lots of times we have to hold a certain tension and ride through that trial. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I had a story that's always been there. And now there's two more valuable parts in that story. And that's what I mean by I don't think we utilize our own stories to the degree that we could. And that's kind of a happy one. But I think even in those trials and those hard times, hard stories we have in our life, as we all of us have some things that we look back, we wish we didn't have to pass through those things. But at the same time, there's a lot of value in what came from that. So I think there's some work to do on that side. So that was another revelation through season 1 on the value of our own story. And so what is season 2 now? In more detail, season 2 is trying to dive deeper into the story and ask questions like, what are the elements of a good story? Maybe even before that, it's like, what is the story? Why share stories? Why tell stories? There's something I tend to get fascinated with this concept of things that are really old. And I think for the human experience, storytelling has always been there. It was, back in our earliest days and sharing information and sharing story and passing that information and actually passing wisdom was done through storytelling, because that's what we had. And in some ways I wonder if we've lost some of that, or at least there's probably better ways to utilize story in our lives. Not only that personal story, but also just story in general. I look at my life and my history and think about storytelling, or story consumption even. And most of the story consumption I've had throughout my life is for entertainment. And I think there's a value in that for sure, in that even in that story for entertainment, we learn things. It helps us and it helps us to simulate situations that we might encounter in life. But I'm like, there's probably a better way to utilize stories. So that's part of the exploration in season 2 as well. I was like, how can you utilize stories better? I guess the other thing I would say in my learning from season 1 to where we're at now in season 2 is that a greater desire to reach out to all of you out there, to how do we help people more, and actually giving you extra tools and techniques and things to do. Well, right now it's been mostly just the podcast and hearing the stories along with me. My desire is to create some more helps and tools out there for you. So I think that gives a decent summary of what's going on here at StoryHinge, and I just invite you to join, to come and be part of this, and we'll dive into stories and deeper and hear more from storytellers and their different creative processes, and hear about what story's about. So StoryHinge. Thanks guys. We'll catch you later.